History can be dangerous. Historic folklore especially, as it sweeps through cultures, digging its teeth into the psyches of generations. It produces the kind of chill that lodges itself in your bones and stays for a lifetime. And Aaron Mahnke loves it. Whether it's creature sightings rooted in myth or documented proof of a con man who killed to collect insurance payouts, then buried his victims in the walls of his mansion, Aaron shines a light in the forgotten corners of history on his podcast, Lore.
I'm a lifelong learner, and I love to share those details. All the stuff that you'd bring up at a fun party, like thinking about the first episode of Lore, being able to say to some stranger, hey, did you know that a farmer in 1893 dug up his dead daughter and burned her heart so that he could feed the ashes to his dying son? It's like, okay, that's the kind of stuff I love to learn and then share with other people. That's the sweet spot for me. Storytelling is an outlet of all of that curiosity. And I think a lot of the success of Lore, it's a testament to how well that resonates with the people who listen to the show, because they love to learn things that they can then turn around and tell to others.
Aaron's latched onto something huge. Lore is one of the most successful podcasts ever made, with over 300 million downloads and counting. But the show was one click away from never happening. I'm Doug Fraser, and this is What We Do, where we'll meet the people behind the most intriguing passions, hobbies, and jobs around the world. Why do you think people like to be scared?
A lot of what we do in life is fear management, isn't it? Which I guess understandably is a pretty frustrating and anxiety-inducing thing. We're always managing our fears. But there's something that happens when you open up your app on your phone and you tap play and you listen to someone else's story, and you experience their fear secondhand. It sort of puts you in the driver's seat. We can stop at any time. We can just tap the pause button and walk away. That anxiety will go away. And there's something powerful about that, about putting people in charge of fear, even if it's just for 30 minutes at a time. And so I think the explosion that we see of, like the genre of true crime in podcasts is empirical proof of that by, peering into the window of somebody else's misfortune, we somehow, self-medicate and maybe even learn some new skills for coping with our own anxieties. And let me say too, that this isn't new to podcasting. In my research, one of the things that we've discovered is that, there was a period of time in the Victorian era in London where there were dozens of small newspapers independently published by, one or two owners. They were all about crimes. They would have, full page woodcut etchings on the front, playing out the crime. There would be page after page of different true crimes that had happened recently. And they came out all the time and they were massive, massive hits. And then you get into like the early part of the 20th century when comic books first became a medium. One of the most common comic books you could pick up were true crime comic books. We did an episode a few months ago about a guy who lived in the attic of his lover. And, the husband would go off to work and the lover would come down out of the attic and they would do life together. And I think he cut her hair and read stories to her, all sorts of things like that. And it was one of the best primary sources for that story was from a true crime comic book from the 1920s or 30s. So this idea that we love to watch other people's frightening stories so that we can sort of manage that, I think it's always been there. We're just seeing it now in a new medium.
As a kid, Aaron had a handful of favorite TV shows, but one that truly captured his curiosity was Unsolved Mysteries.
Join me for these intriguing stories and more. Perhaps you may be the one chosen by fate to solve a mystery.
Unsolved Mysteries was great. I mean, Robert Stack was the best host and narrator for that sort of genre. And I have very fond memories of, I loved it when they would finish an episode, they'd do that big story and then they would say update. And then they would give you the update on a case. It was just so satisfying as a kid to say, oh man, somebody called in and gave them more information. And now we know more about this thing that happened. And I loved that.
For every mystery, there is someone who knows the truth. Perhaps it's you.
It was an early storytelling lesson for Aaron. The truth was out there. He just needed to know where to look. One place he looked and struck historic gold was in the Scholastic book catalogs.
In 1985, I was 10. I was in the midst of all the joys of fifth grade. I was a bookworm, I took a lot of joy from things like the Scholastic Readers Club catalogs that would come through school, which my kids now bring home, and I want to buy everything in them. Just like Pavlovian, it's there. They might put something in the ink, I don't know. And it was a book that came from one of those catalogs that actually kicked off my love for story. It was I can't remember what it was called. To this day, I've never been able to remember the author, the title, or what the cover looks like. And I've had people offer me images and say, hey, is it this? Is it this? And I just, at this point, I don't know. But it was basically a book of weird historical tales that were supposed to be true, but were so incredible that they couldn't possibly be true. We think that, history's boring, or it's just all about memorizing facts, dates, people, places, that kind of thing. And books like that sort of changed the way that I viewed history, that there's a lot we don't talk about. There's the black and white stuff. It's easy, it's compartmentalized, but there's all this gray area around it. And books like that as a kid were a way for me to learn that, wow, there are really weird, bizarre things that we have proof that happened. But why aren't we talking about them? Because they're so much more exciting. And for me, the attractive stuff was always the unexpected historical oddities. Things like a mystery or unexpected reveals, that sort of thing. I have these really firm memories of, I never listened to his radio program, but Paul Harvey had this show called The Rest of the Story. And it's sort of a mix of like American history meets Ripley's Believe It or Not. He would have, maybe 3 to 4 minutes on the radio clock. And I think it was a weekly show. I never listened. I had 2 paperbacks that were collections of them. But it was essentially, hey, let me tell you the story about this really amazing person. And he did these wild, crazy things. Sam was just an adventurer, and he did these things and saved his brother. And then at the very end of this little quick story, he reveals that Sam was Samuel Clemens or Mark Twain. And your brain blows up because you were buying into this really weird, amazing stuff happened. And then he associates it with this well-known, supposedly, stuffy person who never would have done things like that. And I loved stories like that unlocked a different aspect of history. And that was it for me. Like that particular genre of story was what put a hook in my heart and just dragged me. And it's never let go.
I don't know what's gonna kill me, but I mean to find out.
Flash forward to 2015. Aaron's been working as a graphic designer for 10 years and writing self-published supernatural thrillers.
I was doing some historical research to weave some, local legends or some real events into the stories.
He had quite a few leftovers he didn't know what to do with. Then he hatched a plan. He wanted to grow interest for his books and collect emails, so he created a downloadable ebook. The idea being that people could download the book for free in exchange for their email. Aaron would then email them about purchasing one of his full-length books.
I called it my 5 favorite New England legends or myths, and started writing it. I think I got 4 of them written. It was about 10,000 words. And then I had this moment where I realized I was going to be giving people a letter-sized PDF of 10,000 words to read on their mobile phone. And that is not a happy prospect. And I thought, man, I'm going to be asking for a valuable thing, their email address, in return for a really frustrating item.
So he quit.
I'd been writing my entire life, and I said, this is it. This was my last Hail Mary attempt to make something of my writing, and it's not going to work. It sounds very stereotypical, like something from a made-for-TV movie, but I literally clicked on the file for that document, and I dragged it to my trash can. And right before I let go, like I'm hovering over the can, I remembered, man, I have a microphone. And I do listen to audiobooks. Like, why don't I try recording one of these?
He put on his best Aaron Mahnke performance voice, recorded an episode, and sent it to a friend who said,
man, your plan is not right. I thought, well, thank you for your encouragement. That was very helpful of you. He said, no, this is a podcast. And I fought him on it for a while, but eventually I said okay, and I released it as a podcast.
This is a clip of episode 1, titled, They Made a Tonic.
Hollywood is obsessed. Sure, we often think of obsessions like sex, violence, gigantic robots, and, of course, epic battles between good and evil. But another obsession of Hollywood is vampires.
About a month after episode 1 was released, a curious thing happened. Apple put Lore in the new and noteworthy section. Downloads of the show skyrocketed.
It was a really crazy week when it happened because it was like 350 the first day, 850 the second, and it was 3,500 and 8,500, and it just kept exploding.
Lore was growing like wildfire. It had blown up so much that 4 months after episode 1 was released, Aaron was able to produce the show full-time with his sponsorships. 5 months in, he started conversations with Amazon about turning Lore into a TV show, which now has 2 seasons out on Amazon Prime Video. He also hosts 2 other podcasts, Cabinet of Curiosities and Unobscured, which is the first podcast to have its soundtrack released by a major record label. I think that's a lot on his plate? There's more. Aaron is also an executive producer on Noble Blood, a podcast exploring the dark side of history's most fascinating royals. And he has 3 other shows currently in development. He shares the work with a few teams, including 7 researchers for Lore alone. But still, with so many spinning plates, Aaron has built a monster of his own, which he keeps on a tight leash.
My mornings are my writing time, and nothing invades that. And my writing time is sacred. It has to be, right? Because I have all these other shows, but at the end of the day, they're passengers on the plane that Lore built. And if I don't write, Lore doesn't move forward. So I've just had to decide that nothing else is more important than sitting down and writing my stories. One of the things that I look at, the lenses I look at my career through, is that I'm sort of gathering up stories that we might forget or might get tossed to the side or lost in the jumble of the bigger historical events. And I'm kind of gathering them together and keeping them safe in little digital bundles.
So history is filled with a lot of tales of creating outgroups, witches, for example. What has your countless hours of research taught you about the dangers of groupthink?
I think I've learned how easy it is for a society to turn off their critical thinking and just believe what people in charge are telling them to believe. You see it in witch trial stories all the time, or in stories of outbreak of disease. And mass panic and following the herd is, I don't know, it's just so much easier than stopping for a moment and thinking through things. And I don't mean that in a negative way. The truth is, I think most people just don't know how to do it any other way. It's not their fault. I think we've stopped teaching critical thinking in schools, and doing what others do around us is just a lot easier when our lives are so insanely busy. We were raised to not believe what you read on the internet, and yet the coin has flipped, and now we're in a world where people believe everything they read on the internet. And groupthink has dangers in that environment because there's no checks and balances for that.
Aaron and his team pour weeks into every episode. As you can imagine, each one becomes his favorite in its own way. But episode 12, a story of how communities treat outsiders, stands above the others.
I think it's called A Half Hanged, and it's about a colonial Massachusetts woman, early 1600s. Her name's Mary Webster, and it's all about the outsider, how one woman rubbed the rest of the town the wrong way, and how their fear and their superstition were eventually wielded like a weapon to put a stop to her. But it's also one of my favorite stories because it's a story of victory and strength, because in the end, spoiler alert, Mary wins. And so while I do think seeing our flaws in another person's story is always eye-opening, finding hope is also possible. And yeah, I love scaring people, but I also love offering them a little bit of hope.
If someone made a movie of your life, which at some point they just might, what would the headline be on the movie poster?
Oh, man. Most people associate me with the intro line that I use on every episode. I'm Aaron Mahnke, and this is Lore. So that would probably be somewhere on the poster. But yeah, I think there's a lot of better movies out there to make.
And it's funny with association and sort of the Pavlovian response that we kind of touched on earlier is when you say that, when that line comes on the episode, I get chills because I know that the story is coming.
You know, I made it up on the very first episode, and it sort of evolved over time. You get a bit more performative with it, but taking lore on the road to do live shows has been so fun on a lot of different levels. You know, number one, podcasting is this thing you do in a closet, and you get to get out and see people, the real live human beings who listen to your show. That's always really fun. I step on stage and I do a quick monologue, and then I pick up my leather-bound book and I read one short story. And at the end of that story, I have built in sort of a looking ahead to the next hour and a half of content that we're about to go through, the adventure we're going to go on. And then I end it with that, I'm Aaron Mahnke, and this is lore. And I can very frequently not get through that entire phrase before the audience starts screaming and clapping. It's incredibly humbling just to hear people who are apparently in love with something that you made. And yeah, 5 years in, man, I'm just so grateful.
Lore is an anomaly in the podcast world, a creature brought to life as an ebook, shape-shifting into a podcast. The story of its creation is itself folklore, collected stories of an international community of listeners bewitched by forgotten history and haunted by a love for fear. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. Would you mind leaving a rating and review for the show? It only takes a moment and it's a huge help. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. Until next time, stay curious. What We Do is produced by me, Doug Frazier, for WHRO Public Media.